Hello, everybody. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio Network, where our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guests may not represent those of the host of the station. Folks, you're going to want to listen to this podcast. Actually, I think you should listen to all my podcasts. Little plug there. I have a tremendous, wonderful guest on who I've known for 5 years. I've been after Cassidy for 2 years to come on my show. And I want to tell you about Cassidy Bastien. She is wonderful. I love her. She is creator and founder of the Caregivers Hub support group. It's on Facebook, the Caregivers Hub Marketplace. Cassidy has been a CNA for 19 years, and she's been a Hospice CNA for 5 of those years. She's an End of Life Doula. She is starting her My End of Life Northwest business. And, folks, I have to tell you, in all honesty, I tell you my experience, so you learn from it. Had I had known about death doulas 2 years ago, and they were that popular 2 years ago, I would have gotten one for Matt and myself, and I would have hired Cassidy, and I wished I lived near her so she could have came in person. But Cassidy does consult over the phone. And I want to welcome Cassidy Bastien.
Hi, Betsy. Thank you so much for having me on. I am so proud of you. It's been an honor to be a part of your world in the last 5 years. I have seen you grow incredibly. So the fact that you came to me looking for support with your caregiving journey with Matt, and now here we are talking about end-of-life doulas 5 years later is just an incredible testament to how hard you've worked. So congratulations to you on that.
Oh, thank you, Cassidy. And I'm proud of you also for starting your dream, your business of end-of-life doula. And I want to encourage everybody, you could belong to more than one support group. I belong to Cassidy's, the Caregivers Hub. I'm a moderator there, although I haven't done much moderating, but it's a great effort. Support group. Yes, it's a great support group. It helped me tremendously with my journey with Matt, and I suggest everyone go check it out, and information will be in the blog, so read the blog. So, Cassidy, how and why did you start? We'll start with your Caregivers Hub as to why you started it.
So I want to say I was, as a certified nurse's aide, I started in skilled nursing facilities, right, and I progressed all the way to outpatient hospice in this greater Seattle area. But being in a skilled nursing facilities and doing the work there for a majority of my career, there's no, how do I say it? There's no, we can't deny the fact that in traditional healthcare there is a hierarchy, and the certified nurse's aide is the low man on the totem pole. But the truth of the matter is that certified nurse's aides are the foundation of care in healthcare, whether it is hospice care and end-of-life care, or it is in the hospital, or it is in a skilled nursing facility, assisted living, adult family home. Anybody who's physically providing care and holding a license to do so is the foundation of care in healthcare, but it is not often perceived that way. So the Caregivers Hub started out as a fan page, and it just was my way to share all of my knowledge and my experience as I had learned at that time was I was 14, 15 years in, maybe even 13, 14, I can't remember. But at that point, I started to realize and empower myself that I wasn't just the low man on the totem pole, that I had valuable skills as a certified nurse's aide that were beneficial to not only other certified nurses' aides and, medical staff, but that it was even more valuable, the information I had, to family caregivers. And I felt that it was like a personal moral obligation that if I had this wisdom and this knowledge to positively impact somebody's caregiving journey, then it was my responsibility to do so. And that's where the Caregivers Hub support group came from. It was really this place that I wanted, because I joined a lot of different support groups, like we talked about, right? Like you don't just have to be in one support group. But I really saw that there was in a lot of different caregiving support groups, and a lot of them were dementia Alzheimer's. And I spent about 3 years working in a locked memory care unit doing activities. So people who are suffering from a dementia-related disease have my heart, because I started to understand this cognitive pattern and behaviors that were present in most of my patients, and kind of how to deal with them in a way that I could continue to provide good care and complete care tasks, and not always have to go head-to-head in the war with providing care to somebody with a dementia-related disease, because that's what it ends up being. And I saw that a lot of people were really degrading a lot of other people for their choices as caregivers, and they weren't allowed to freely express themselves without some type of either admin moderator, I don't want to say retaliation, but sometimes it was. People were getting kicked out for things that they should have been getting support for. So the Caregivers Hub was my way to do it my way. The support group.
I hear you.
To have people there.
Yes. Yeah, I understand that. And what I loved about your group, and I still love about your group, Cassidy, is that there is no judgment. You know,
Right.
You are very strong in telling us, and as I'm one of the moderators, there's no judgment. And I have found that also, because I went crazy joining support groups in
Right.
2014, because I had no support for 14 years.
Right.
And I just went crazy, and I was really shocked, and I still am, because I still am in a lot of different groups.
Right.
The judgment from other caregivers to other caregivers. I don't get it. I don't understand it. But
there's a whole wormhole we can go down with that.
Yes, yeah, that's a whole other topic. I mean, I know we're on the same wavelength. Like, no one should judge anyone's situation.
No, it's hard enough to be a caregiver, and I think that's what is so great about the Caregivers Hub support group, and why it has such amazing engagement is because, and you're a part of this, Betsy, is that we, and I say we because there's no way that I could have grown the Caregivers Hub and given it the integrity that it deserves without you. And I'm so serious when I say that, that we have created a community where people really, really genuinely feel like they can gain support and not be judged like that. And, of course, we go through our moments, but we've worked really hard to do that.
And your group has grown astronomically.
It has.
It really has grown, and I can't believe it's been 5 years
I know.
since I've met you and joined. And then the marketplace, which I think was a phenomenal idea, was to give people an opportunity, not in the group, but it was like a subdivision to promote their services if they had any, or a book or whatever they had to offer, which was very generous. I thought that was very generous of you to do, Cassidy. Kudos to you.
Well, I mean, I think that all of us were in agreement that this was what was going to be the best way to accommodate all of the people that come to the Caregivers Hub, because there's 6.8 thousand members all over the world at this point. And a lot of those are people who are former caregivers who have such passionate voices for advocating for care and spreading knowledge and wisdom about caregiving. And if we had allowed everybody in the main support group to continue to promote all of these amazing things, we would have taken away from the integrity that the group was there for, and that is to ask for advice, gain support, gain knowledge. And so the Caregivers Hub Marketplace was just a no-brainer. we needed to do that. So
yes, and that I think it was a great idea.
I think
and
so
I
too.
do post my podcast on there that
I know, I love
caregiving.
that.
You know,
it's
that
great, though.
Yeah, that pertains to the caregiving. And I have to, you and I just love you, Cassidy, because you and I are on the same wavelength of bringing up the conversations of end of life.
Right.
And you're an end of life doula, and that's so wonderful. And thank you for being going in that direction and being an end-of-life doula and helping people at the end of life. So for those of you who don't know what an end-of-life doula is, could you please explain that?
Absolutely. So an end-of-life doula is a non-medical, especially trained person on end of life, the end-of-life process, how to support people who are in their end-of-life journey and support their families. And that goes from diagnosis all the way through bereavement. But they are non-medical. So they are valued members of the end-of-life care team. So that is what an end-of-life doula is.
So a person who gets a diagnosis, I'm just going to say Alzheimer's because that's what Matt had, they can contact an end-of-life doula and say, my spouse or partner or whoever it is has a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. Can I consult with you now? And you help them with legal papers or guide them?
So most end-of-life doulas are absolutely well-versed on advanced directives and end-of-life care planning. And that's a huge aspect of what end-of-life doulas do is making sure that people and their families are educated and have narrowed down their end-of-life wishes, what paperwork does need to be filled out, and referring families and patients to local resources like elder care attorneys, estate planners, to get wills and estates and all of these end-of-life things that we need to take care of long before we get to end of life, but often wait until the final days to take care of. End-of-life doulas are absolutely an incredible resource before you even get to your end-of-life journey, to plan your end-of-life journey. And that's what my End-of-Life Northwest is. I want people to come to my website and plan their end of lives. And let's talk about that, because this is truly an event that is going to happen to every single one of us, and there's no way we're ever going to get out of that. Every single one of us who lives here is going to die here, and there's no point in waiting until you're not well to plan and narrow down and fully embrace and orchestrate how your end of life is going to go. So I encourage you, from the minute you get a diagnosis that is life-limiting and at the end of it the prognosis is death, contact an end-of-life doula and start planning things out. That will be your point person. You will have all of their information. When you're no longer able to advocate for yourself, your family has your end-of-life doula's number. And that is the person who's going to walk that family through that person's end-of-life journey. And that has,
I think, Yeah, that's so important. Now, with the end-of-life doula, because I'm curious, I'm more curious now about the role of a doula. Do they help a person navigate hospice care, like picking out a hospice? Absolutely. It is my, of course, hospice care and end-of-life care has
always, since the foundation of my career as a certified nurse's aide, been sacred work to me. Never failed that I was that last person with that person. I was the person who stepped up and was not afraid to provide after-death care and postmortem cares after somebody had passed. And so from the beginning of my journey as a CNA almost 19 years ago, end-of-life care has been prevalent. And it is my job as a hospice clinician to make sure that families understand what's happening when I walk in that door and what's coming down the pipeline. And that is no different from an end-of-life doula. So your end-of-life doula absolutely needs to understand the hospice benefit and be prepared to speak to those hospice team members and absolutely be your hospice liaison.
Oh, that is a help, folks. I'm telling you, I would highly, I can't even say it enough, Cassidy. I know I probably sound like redundant, but going through the experience I went through, I wouldn't hesitate to call a doula if I knew I was dying. If I got a diagnosis, I would contact you to help me find someone in New Jersey.
I would absolutely do that for you.
I certainly would. Now, does the death doula, do they visit in the home periodically, like if it's a long time, with a diagnosis that meant to be 10 years?
Right. So of course, COVID changed our world. It changed every aspect of what we do. So a lot of end-of-life doulas and families do consult virtually at this point, given the fact that, they're only doing in-person visits as needed, right? Like if this person is in crisis and if it can't be managed virtually, of course that local end-of-life doula is going to be present. But it's my full belief that if we're fully vaccinated, going into fully vaccinated homes, and we're taking our proper precautions, everybody, there's no reason we can't sit down and with the necessary PPE and absolutely consult with families in person. Something that I'm going to be incorporating in my practice, but the virtual aspect has opened up end-of-life doula consults and managing cases outside of their local area. It's a greater, wider net now that we have the ability to really virtually consult and manage cases. But I definitely think there is no greater need than in-home end-of-life doulas to come and to sit at bedside and hold vigil, especially right now when hospice programs are not putting volunteers in the field due to COVID. There is nobody to sit bedside with families and patients as they're actively transitioning besides end-of-life doulas and community death care workers at this time.
Well, I could say that in my experience with Matt, when he was in the hospice unit up in the hospital, there was nobody sitting with me. Mm-hmm. Not one person from hospice. Actually, they don't have the time to sit. Yeah. And that's why I think having an end-of-life doula is so important, just to have someone explain the transitioning process, explaining the death process, being there as a support for the family and that individual who is dying. I really can't impress upon how important that is. And that's just, to me, you're doing a work. Anyone who's in the life doula is an angel. You're doing angel work, because it's so important. And you're right, Cassidy. CNAs are the backbone. Nurses rely on CNAs. I worked as an aide way before you had to be certified, back in the Stone Age when you were a little girl. Maybe you probably weren't even born. No, never mind, you weren't even born. I forget, I'm an old lady here. Oh. I was an aide as a teenager. Back in 74, 75. Yeah, you weren't born because you're Josh's age. I forget. You're a youngster. But it's just, it is important. And, you go into a hospital, I know in the hospice unit, it was an RN and the aide for 5 patients. That's what they had on that floor, was 5 patients. Not sometimes all at once, and sometimes there was, but it is. The CNAs are the backbone. And what I'm going to tell people, be kind to your CNA and your staff.
Please do. We really appreciate it.
Please, yes, and show some appreciation. I know when my dad was in a facility, my mom would give gift cards to the ones that really, went above. And, you get more with honey, right, than with vinegar.
Absolutely. Well, we are at a point where healthcare is $1 billion business, $1 trillion business if we think about it. And we are at this point in healthcare, not just hospice care, where people who are receiving care on a business end are numbers. But we have to remember that these people that we get compensated to care for are human beings. And whether that's an end of life or that's you just walking into your regular primary care doctor, we are human beings caring for other human beings, and we have to remember that in healthcare. We have to remember that because the system has set us up to fail. I myself have walked in one time in my almost 19 years, I had 30 patients that I had to take care of. I was only one of 2 CNAs for an entire facility that decided to show up for work that day. Nobody got out of bed. Everybody ate their meals in bed. I only had time to change and feed people in an entire 8-hour shift. And I cried for 8 hours because this is like the worst. Those of us who genuinely care about providing care to other people as professionals hate having to be in those positions. And this entire industry puts certified nurses aides and nurses in that position every single day with low staffing rates, uncompensated the way that they should be compensated. This is a problem in healthcare, and that's where we are right now today, whether it's end-of-life care or it's traditional healthcare. We are at a crisis.
So true, Cassidy. Yes, and short staff has always been around.
Oh, for
I
sure.
can say, and I know since the 70s, it's been always short staff. I worked in a nursing home. I was 16 years old. I had 16 patients to wash, feed, and get dressed and get up. That's a lot. I cried too.
That's a lot. I know, right?
Yeah.
And then we wonder why people don't want to stay in this industry. It is a moral crisis that we end up having to deal with. And you're right, staffing issues have been a problem for as long as I've been alive. But COVID added on an extra layer to that, right?
That's right?
Like we are, boots on the ground out here.
Yeah.
And it has not stopped. It didn't stop from the minute the first patient died in the U.S., and here we are, all these people later. We have not stopped. And now we're continuing to have to work with short staffing. And the quality of care continues to go down. The continuity of care continues to go down because at this point, we need people to care for people. And a lot of states are having mandates for vaccinations. Our state does as well. So those who didn't have exemptions lost their jobs last week, So it's a scary time to be in healthcare in general, not just with COVID, but we are in uncharted territory that only adds to the problems that we face when we go to a healthcare facility to gain care. We're kind of at the whim of how it's going to be when we walk in the door, whether you're providing that care or you're receiving that care. That's where we find ourselves today.
That's very true. I want to ask you this, Cassidy, in case people are wondering, and I thought of it. What should someone look for in picking out an end-of-life doula? Is there certain certifications?
So here's the nuts and the bolts about certification right now with end-of-life doulas. Because they are a non-medical position, right? It's a non-medical industry. There is no regulatory federal or state agency that oversees end-of-life doulas. So there's not one specific certification, right? There are in-house certifications with many different programs all over the world, really. So the things that you're looking for are people who have gone through training with an in-house training program that has signed and documented paperwork saying that you have received this training, your skills have been tested, you are abiding by this scope of practice and this code of ethics, because end-of-life doulas have scopes of practice and codes of ethics. You also want to look for somebody who has micro-credentialed, there's proficiency badges through the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance. Almost every large training, end-of-life doula training program has a requirement of 30 hours of bedside experience in holding vigil next to an actively dying patient or person. So all of these little things add more credentials and credibility behind an end-of-life doula. That's not to say, however, that if an end-of-life doula has not gone through an end-of-life training program or class, that they aren't experienced doing community death work. Long before we ever had a end-of-life doula movement, we had community death workers, people who are pillars of their communities, who have, without compensation, gone and cared for the dying and the dead. So I would say, in order to really get a good view, you need to compile a list of things that are important to you in your end-of-life journey and vet this person if they can accommodate and help you with those things. Because maybe there is somebody who has not gone through a certified end-of-life doula class or an end-of-life doula training, but they've been in their community for 20, 30-plus years working with different programs who go in and provide services for the dying and the dead. Right? So that doesn't mean that they aren't valued and experienced death care workers. So it's really going to come down to what's important to you in an end-of-life doula. If that micro-credentialing and that class and that training is important to you, that should absolutely be on your list of things to look for. But if it's the fact that somebody has had 30-plus years working with different organizations in their communities, providing and doing death work, that's also something that should be on your list too, right? We're not just looking for somebody who woke up yesterday and said, I want to be an end-of-life doula. We want somebody who has experience providing end-of-life support to families and to patients. And also the other thing about end-of-life doulas is the fact that they're non-medical. They're not caregivers. They're not somebody who's going to come and bathe and wash your people or provide physical care unless they actually have a license and a scope of practice to do that. And they have to be willing to show and produce those credentials at any time. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yes, that makes sense. That's why I wanted you to, explain about the doula so people don't think, oh, yeah, they're going to come in and watch my patient, my loved one and help me with the care. I think it's really why I would have liked a doula was actually more for me. That might sound selfish, but
no, that's not selfish
for support
at all.
for me, for support for me as I was sitting there keeping vigil with Matt.
Yeah.
Someone
absolutely.
Just to be there to listen to me, and to just hold my hand.
Goal. That's their role, is to open. It's really and truly an end-of-life doula opens the door and holds space for death and dying. And that's without judgment, and that's without an agenda, right? So, but it might also be that end-of-life doula takes that list of funeral homes and sits down and calls and asks all the questions for you and gets all of the prices so that you can make an educated decision on, what is the best means of disposition for you after you pass or for your loved one. Or maybe now you are so burnt out you need a caregiver, and there's a list of caregiving agencies that are local in your hospice binder, or that maybe your hospice social worker has given you. That end-of-life doula can sit down and call those agencies and get their prices for, So it's more, it's really pulling the resources in and how can I best support this family, because what I see as a hospice clinician, because it's when someone comes on hospice, it's like the cavalry arrives, right? And it is overwhelming. Maybe you have not had anybody in your home, and you've been on this journey for 14 years by yourself, and all of a sudden you have a steady parade of hospice clinicians coming in and a barrage of information that you are now responsible to intercept and implement and know, and the learning curve with end of life and death and dying, if you've never been down that journey and you're brand new to this, is immense. And oftentimes the primary caregiver is left with all of those responsibilities, and the end-of-life doula is to be there to help them navigate those, pull in community resources, take stock of who you have available to you and your family or friends list that are willing to bring in meals or sit with your loved one for an hour while you take a shower, And sometimes it's having conversations and asking for help that you're maybe not willing to do yourself, but an end-of-life doula is happy to do for you. So they're a great asset.
That's great information, Cassidy. I really appreciate you sharing it because, it is overwhelming, folks. I'm not going to sit here and lie to an audience. I was overwhelmed, and I worked as a licensed practical nurse, but I was overwhelmed with getting that on hospice, and it just, the end-of-life care. It's really can be very overwhelming, and it's emotional. It's exhausting. I'm so glad that end-of-life doulas are now becoming more prominent. Would you say they've gotten more recognition in past?
Absolutely.
Well, Matt's gone 2 years. Like 2 years ago, I heard of end-of-life doula, but I don't think they were as prominent as they are now.
No, and they weren't. So as we were talking about earlier prior to the show, that now you're seeing the end of life doula movement gain more momentum. We are seeing more people utilize end of life doulas. They're becoming more educated about them. Hospice programs are finding ways to incorporate end of life doulas or consult with end of life doulas to assist with their programs. So we're seeing a forward momentum. Especially with the fact that a lot of end-of-life doulas are doing community death education. They are holding death cafes. They are having death and dying events that provide the community with general education about, hospice eligibility or, the dying process. Some people go to end-of-life trainings that simply just want to learn how to better care for their loved ones in their community as they're dying. So the momentum is growing. And 2 years ago, I got certified in 2019, but in 2017, the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization actually gave a formal nod to end-of-life doulas, that they are valued members of the end-of-life care team. And now, fast forward in 2020, there's actually an end-of-life doula advisory board for the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, which is huge, right? Because all national hospices recognize that the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization is a valued resource for hospices, for education, for what mandates, policies, and procedures are coming down with Medicare. It really is a huge support to the end-of-life doula community to have the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization's support. And they have a ton of resources for hospices to go onto their website and go to the End-of-Life Doula Advisory Board and look how you can incorporate an end-of-life doula into your hospice. Maybe it's referral. Maybe it's training your volunteers how to hold vigil, right, and what that really means and how that's really done. Because out of the entire hospice team, the volunteer prior to COVID was besides the chaplain, the only person who really has the time in the day to sit down and hold that vigil for like 4 hours, right? So that's not a privilege that I get as a certified nurse's aide. I get the privilege of providing postmortem cares and after-death visits and really making those things meaningful and let families know what's possible after death. But I don't get the privilege to just sit down as a certified nurse's aide in hospice and hold that vigil for 4 hours, right? Yes, I get an hour. I get a privileged hour with each of those people in those moments, in those spaces. But it never is more than that because there's simply no time for it to be. So end-of-life doulas have slowly been gaining momentum to do this work, and we're now really seeing it start to take off and be noticed and appreciated and valued.
Well, I could tell you, Cassidy, and I'm going to tell the world this. I appreciate end-of-life doulas. I wish I had one. I am more than happy to promote you, Cassidy, as end-of-life doula. You're welcome. I am happy to promote someone getting an end-of-life doula, talking about these conversations, talking about this, not because I'm morbid, it's because it's important. It's very important for people to be, comfortable really with the uncomfortable. No one's comfortable talking about dying, but have these conversations because I know even in a small hospice unit in the hospital, there was no one to sit vigil with Josh and I. There was nobody. And I really could have used
That's
it.
sad.
Yeah.
A hospice program should absolutely have somebody who's willing to sit with you. But like I said, COVID threw hospice programs a loop. They couldn't have their volunteers in their facilities to do that, which they normally would be. They didn't even have them sitting at the front desk checking visitors in. That went to me. That was my job. So,
Well, this was before COVID.
Oh, was it before? Well, that's even
COVID,
sadder, Betsy. There's no excuse then, for the love of Pete.
Matt died before COVID.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. And this is why, folks, this is why I do Chatting with Betsy. To give people resources, to tell people about people like Cassidy who can help you, which I knew about end-of-life doulas, but it really wasn't common 2 years ago. I wish I knew the resources that were available to me. And sometimes, Cassidy, people don't even know what's available in their own backyard. They really don't.
It's really true. And it's because we don't look. The one resource I really want to just make a quick plug into that's been super valuable to myself, if you're looking for an end-of-life doula in your local area, go to the National End of Life Doula Alliance.org, and they have a complete state-by-state registry of end-of-life doulas in your local area. Most of the members, and it'll show next to their name and their number, they are what we call NEDA proficient. They have taken an exam that has tested their knowledge and skills in regards to end-of-life care, end-of-life advocacy, and the end-of-life process. So you can absolutely know that if it says NEDA proficient next to the end-of-life doula that you're looking for in your local area, they have been vetted that they are absolutely proficient in the end-of-life care process and how to support you through that. So the National End of Life Doula Alliance.org. It's an incredible resource not only for finding end-of-life doulas, but explaining what they are. It shows their scopes of practice and their code of ethics. So check that out. It's a valuable resource for you.
Oh, thank you, Cassidy. And can you tell us, this will be in the blog, folks, so read the blog, but in case you don't read the blog, can you tell people how to get in touch with you, Cassidy, to connect with you?
Absolutely. So I am on Instagram, Cassidy_85, Cassidy_Rose_85. So, and from there you can absolutely access my Facebook, which is My End of Life Northwest /Facebook.com/My End of Life Northwest. You can book a consult there. You can also call me from there, I believe. And also you can go to my website, My End of Life Northwest.com, which is myendoflifenw.com, and from there you can get a hold of me as well for a free consultation or just a call on the phone.
Oh, thank you, Cassidy. I am so glad to finally have had you on my show. I'd love to have you on again.
I love it. Anytime.
There's so much we can discuss, and talking about Deaf Cafes. I loved your Deaf Cafe last week. It was the first one I ever went to. Thought it was beautiful being with kindred spirits.
It was.
Kindred people. It was. And, it's not being morbid, folks. I want you to know that. Catherine and I are not morbid. We are we're popping open, let's put it this way, the lid off of what people think are taboo, but it's not. And that's death and dying, folks. We need to talk about it.
Absolutely.
And here on Chatting with Betsy, we will. Thank you. Thank you, Cassidy.
You're so welcome, Betsy. Yep, and those Deaf Cafes are monthly. So if you go to Facebook.com/My End of Life Northwest, you will see that our next Deaf Cafe is November 14th at 1 p.m. Pacific. You can just go into the event on the Facebook page and click going. The Zoom link is in that event.
Awesome, and I encourage people to attend because it was really very informative.
Good.
Of just listening to other people, and connecting with other people. So thank you so much, Cassidy, and I wish you the best. In your future as a end of life doula. I know you're going to be wonderful at it because you are. You have a heart of gold. You're compassionate, and you're just you're welcome. You're just amazing, and that's how I feel about Cassidy, folks. I don't hide how I feel. Thank you. I'm my father's daughter. I'm from New Jersey. I tell it straight up. And thank you. And I just, when I'm passionate about something, I'm passionate about it. And, people might think, Betsy, you're passionate about every guest that comes on. Well, they might have a topic I'm really passionate about. And offer a service or a book that I really think people should take advantage of.
Absolutely.
Sometimes we do have to spend money to get services. I mean, that's the way it is, folks. That's what I call the American way. You know,
Right.
you have to pay for services that will help you or your loved one. And I really, I know I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. I really would have gotten an end-of-life doula had I had known if there were any in my area to have helped me. I think it's so important. I encourage everyone, you know, learn from my mistakes so you don't make the same mistake. Get help. You can't do this alone. Get help. Right. It's not a sign of weakness to ask for help. It's not a sign of strength.
We shouldn't do it alone. We should not go through our end-of-life journey alone. And that is what's missing today is the end-of-life doula and the care team, because we get a lot of hospice patients who return their surveys feeling and stating like they have been abandoned by their hospice team.
Absolutely.
And that, I don't feel like that would happen if we had an end-of-life doula who knows what questions to ask and how to be assertive to certain hospice teams and certain hospice treatments, you know, and just overall advocating for their people at end of life. It's super, super important. And most end-of-life doulas that I know offer sliding scale services. And it's actually within my doula giver scope of practice that we never turn away anybody, that if we cannot provide those services ourselves, we find a doula in their local area that can. So there's really no excuse to not reach out for an end-of-life doula and to say that they cost too much money. But it's also important to know that end-of-life doulas are not covered by insurance, right? They are private pay. So, but they're so valuable. And if they offer a sliding scale option, which I do, you know, there's no reason not to utilize them. There's really no reason.
Absolutely. Oh, that reminds me of another question before I forget, Cassidy. So the end-of-life doula, how long do they keep in contact with the family after a loved one has passed?
Oh, my gosh. For as long as that family wants them to be a part of their world. We go beyond, you know, hospice has a 1-year bereavement program, which is covered by Medicare and a requirement of their program, which is incredible that somebody took the time to say, okay, if we're going to offer an end-of-life program that's covered by Medicare, we're also going to require that we offer a bereavement program for those people, which is super important. But that only goes on for 15 months after a death. The end-of-life doula can go on and check in with that person. Maybe they're checking in versus, you know, 6 months to a year, you know, even more than that, right? But maybe 2 years down the road, if you're still struggling, you can call your end-of-life doula that you worked with and say, I'm still struggling. And that end-of-life doula will know some local resources and support groups or counselors or grief counselors or anybody in their network locally that they can plug you into long after hospice has not decided, but their requirements for continuing to offer you grief and bereavement support. So the end-of-life doula is beyond bereavement, you know, to a certain degree.
That's great to know. With Mount's particular hospice, and this is another reason why end-of-life doula is so important. In my situation, this is only my experience, that they had a support group. That was in March. Matt died in January. They had one support group. COVID happened. That was it. I didn't hear from hospice. Nobody checked on me. And they didn't offer any resources. Thankfully, I knew about my senior center that they offer free counseling. So this is why it's so important to know about resources, and really you don't need to know about resources. People don't really know until they need it.
Exactly.
Which is what happens.
But the good thing, an end-of-life doula has all of those resources on their list.
That's amazing.
Oh,
my
more
goodness.
Than what a hospice can. Sometimes end-of-life doulas know of local resources that social workers and hospices don't or aren't aware of, right?
That's right. Oh, that is just like thrills my heart, Cass. Like that. I'm just like sometimes at a loss of words because what an end-of-life doula does is so phenomenal. Right. And it takes a special person. Really, it does. To me, it takes a special person to be
Absolutely.
a hospice nurse, a hospice CNA, hospice volunteer, and an end-of-life doula. It's not easy. It's not easy work, and that's why I call it angels work, because they are helping a family in such a tough time, and that's
Absolutely.
an understatement. And I can't thank you enough. I can't thank you enough, Cassidy, for doing what you're doing and bringing to light what an end-of-life doula does. And I thought you did excellent. This is
wonderful.
Excellent interview. Thank you so much, folks.
You're so welcome.
You're welcome. Thank you. If you missed any of this podcast, you can hear it all over again on your favorite podcast outlet, and it's free to subscribe to Chatting with Betsy on CastBox, Spotify, Spreaker, just to name 3 of them. But share this podcast. This is important information, so important. Share it to help someone, because we're all going to die at some point, and we need this information. Don't wait till the last minute. Find out your resources. And I would not hesitate to call Cassidy should I need an end-of-life doula, even if it's to refer me to someone in my area. I wish Cassidy lived in New Jersey. That's what I wish.
I know it.
And, folks, thanks for listening. Thank you, Jeannie White, for producing the show, writing the blog. Thank you to Lillian Caldwell, CEO of Chatting with Betsy. CEO of Passion World Talk Radio Network. Get so excited I can't talk. Who allows Chatting with Betsy and allowing people to talk and to have a voice and to get out this important information. It's important, folks. I can't even tell you over and over again how important this information is and to share. And, in a world where you could be anything, please be kind. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio Network. Till we chat again. Bye-bye now.